Norman, you're very welcome to the ScaleX Insider podcast. We're really thrilled to be speaking with you today.
Good to be here.
As I open with all my guests, our vision is to inspire, connect, and enable millions of ambitious leaders of small and medium-sized enterprises to scale with purpose. So what does scaling with purpose mean to you, Norman?
Well, what purpose means to us is the mission that we have, which centers around climate change and our people. And then I guess scaling, it is meaningless doing it unless it's small. So much better to scale it. And therefore, we think about scale quite a lot. Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, and you certainly have, you're an expert at scaling businesses at this stage, and we're going to get into that as the podcast develops. So let's start. Actually, I mean, you've had an incredible career to date. You've referenced your purpose there. Can we start off by talking about CoolPlanet, the latest company that you lead? The impact you're making on the world is incredible. So please share with our listeners a bit about CoolPlanet and what it means to you.
Yeah, so CoolPlanet has existed for about 12 years. And what we do is we work with the largest companies in the world on decarbonization. So we have what's called DMS, Decarbonization Management System. And so the mission basically is to help them to understand their carbon emissions and their energy and waste costs, and then help them to dramatically reduce those. And we operate that through kind of 4 pillars that which is the kind of lens that we help them.
Can you share with us a little bit more about those 4 pillars then? How are you enabling them?
So we work with like the largest mining company in the world, 7 of the top 8 food companies, 7 of the top 8 pharmaceutical companies, and then a bunch of very high profile names, 3rd largest owner of buildings in the world as well. And if you're them and now you have to decarbonize, it's a huge challenge, right? Because you have to understand what exactly you are using in terms of carbon, and even that is a huge challenge to all of them. Then you have to reduce that amount of carbon, which again involves massive challenges. Then you have to report on how much carbon you're using, and you have to do that in multiple countries around the world. And then there's all sorts of new things now you have to do, like you have to decarbonize your fleet, and you probably never thought about your fleet of vehicles before. And also you need to use more renewables, and when you use more renewables, that causes more challenges to your business. And so we work on, 1, understanding your energy, water, waste. Number 2, adding more and more renewables so that you can decarbonize. Number 3, working on your fleet of vehicles. And then number 4, reporting on all of that, which is something you're obliged to do. And so they're the kind of pillars we work off.
Brilliant. A lot of the listeners to our show are leaders of and founders of small and medium-sized enterprises who right now are struggling with talent, struggling even maybe to craft a vision for the future, maybe stuck in the balls of the business, wanting to free themselves from the day-to-day. Why is decarbonization important to them, and why as a business should they be concerned with this?
Well, there's good news and bad news. Let's do the bad news first. The bad news is it's going to get pushed on them if it hasn't been pushed on them already, right? Because there's all new regulation coming all the time. And a lot of that regulation works for big companies first, or hits big companies first. But now the regulation is hitting all of the suppliers of big companies. And so one of our biggest customers has over 1 million people working in their supply chain across like tens of thousands of companies. And all of those companies now are going to be asked to report in detail on their carbon. And if they don't, then they'll get dropped as suppliers. And they don't just have to report, but they also have to come up with carbon mitigation plans and all of this kind of thing. So it's affecting everything from a beef farmer in Dungannon all the way through to a bicycle supplier in Beijing. It's everybody. And so that's the bad news. The good news is that I think a lot of people feel bad about carbon and climate change, and they'd like to do something about it anyway. So, and also there's a huge financial gain in if you are the most energy efficient supplier of your customer, then you can charge more, right? And if you're the greenest supplier, then normally you can charge more. There are certain sectors where that's not true, but almost every sector that's true. So actually, you can save more money, and you can make more margin if you do this. The one thing that is true is if you don't do it, you're dead within the next 5 or 6 years. So don't worry about it.
uh, well, going back to an earlier point, I know a few beef farmers in Dungannon because I'm
So
not
do
that
I.
far
Yeah.
away, but I don't know too many bicycle suppliers in Beijing. Interestingly, though, and this connects with an earlier episode with Margot Hoek, who is an authority on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And interestingly, the 13th goal is climate action. We advocate to our listeners and certainly those participants going through our program to search for an alignment aligned to their own purpose to one or more of those sustainable development goals. Is that something that has influenced the development of CoolPlanet and what you guys are doing?
Well, CoolPlanet started off first, like with the climate change mission, but it started because nobody cared really about the climate change mission when we started. Certainly, no large corporation. We started off first saving the customers money, basically, and that's still at the core. If you want something to happen fast in a corporation, then save them money, and then you'll get their attention. And that's still the case today, or show them a financial opportunity that they can get their teeth stuck into. And that's not because corporations are bad. It's just that corporations for tens of years, probably hundreds of years, have focused on the bottom line, because without it, they'll be out of business. And so if you can talk to them in that language, rather than this new language of sustainability, a lot of it doesn't ring the bell of corporations, because they've never been brought up that way to care about these things. And it doesn't mean they're bad people. It just means they're not geared to do it. And so I feel, and it seems to work, that when we talk to them in their language, they move a lot faster. And that's what we ultimately care about in the realm of solving climate change.
So in many respects, your positive influence on the P&L and the bottom line is a Trojan horse to actually solve a crisis.
Yeah. Our thing is hit the bottom line or make their jobs easier. Yeah. If you can do one of those two things, they'll love you. If you can't, then you're on a long list of people who'd like to supply to them, but doesn't.
Yeah. And that certainly rings true of every value proposition, the 7th principle in our ScaleX framework. I want to come back to something because we've started with CoolPlanet, but that seems a world away from where you started out and the business that you founded and scaled for, I think, 7 or 8 years, which was Inspired Gaming Group. So share with the listeners the scaling story of Inspired Gaming Group, and then I want to get into how then you arrive at setting up a company that's has a purpose focused on saving the planet.
Yeah, well, maybe start at the beginning. So I set up my first business when I was 15. I grew up on a farm in West Cork in the south of Ireland, and really I got into business because there was no money, and also it was a way of escaping the farm. And at the time, very little money, very small farm. We just wanted to escape and see the world. I was one of 5 brothers, and so I set up a welding business when I was 15. And that became like it was 15 or 17 people by the time I was 20, and it allowed me to make money and develop, I guess. And then I sold that when I was 20. I set up a technology company because I've always loved software and technology. Even when I was a kid, I used to cut code in my bedroom on a Spectrum 48K computer.
I had one.
Yeah. In fact, I saw the boot up screen on Twitter recently. I thought it was the funniest thing.
I hunted in my mother's attic recently to find it, and the precursor to that was the Oric 1, which my brother had. But anyway, I'll not cut across you. You were cutting code on a Spectrum 48K, which is incredible.
Yeah, it's pretty rudimentary stuff. And even when we had the welding business, it was always a bit cutting edge. You know, we would automate something for somebody or whatever. So then we set up a technology company which had a software side to it, and we exited that in 1999 when I was kind of 28 years old, basically. And I retired at the ripe old age of 28. And I retired for a whole day, I'd say, you know, maybe two. And then that's where Inspired Gaming came from. Actually, I'd never been to a betting shop before, and a friend of mine worked with William Hill. And as I was waiting for him, I was looking at people play these kind of antiquated looking machines in the bookies. And when he came out from behind the counter, I asked him about him. And I just said, these things are crying out to be disrupted. And so then we built Inspired Gaming Group, which became a kind of monster business. Yeah.
Couple of things. Can you share with us what the retirement check was at the record age of 28?
It was 14 million pounds at the time. Yeah. But what you learn from that is that it's not about the money, and it was never about the money. It's about the work, basically. And people listening, you know, they might say, "Oh, it's easy for you to say that," but don't get caught by that trap or about it's easy for you to say that. Like, that's like money is important, and even to this day, at the scale we're operating now, money is still important. But don't confuse money being important with the reason why you're doing it. You know, even if it's a pure startup, money is just the speedometer that's telling you how fast you're going. Yeah, it's really about what are you doing and the way you work. And so the thing I learned by not retiring at 28 is that it's about the work, right? Which is why, like, we work probably 6.5 days a week right now, very long days, and I haven't needed to work in 25 years. But I'm working harder than I've ever worked, and it's because of that, right? It's because when you get up in the morning, whether it's minding your children or, you know, doing a startup or whatever you might be doing, that is what defines you. You know, the money is just points in the game. Yeah.
This is something I was going to get into towards the end of the podcast, but let's open that up now, because that's something I found remarkable just during the research of your good self, and we'll come back to the gaming company in a little moment. But Psyche is the #1 principle of our 10 principles Scale X framework, and I say to everyone that if you don't cultivate a scaling mindset, the other 9 principles of scaling a business, which are the technicalities of scaling, are futile in many respects. How have you cultivated this psyche, this scaling mindset, you know, from your 15 years of age? Is it nature or nurture or a mix of both? Or what do you do to motivate yourself?
I think it's discipline, really. You know, Jocko Willink, who has a great podcaster, sometimes it's great, other times it's rubbish. He says, like, discipline equals freedom, you know, and that's very true, you know. So if you take my mental health has kind of 3 pillars and link the same thing to psyche. So 1, physical exercise, absolutely critical. 2, meditation or some form of practice that allows you to kind of check out. And then 3, diet, right? And if you operate at the echelons that we're lucky enough to operate, then that psyche thing is absolutely sacrosanct. And in our business as well, we have 3 tiers of operation that every person who works in the company operates at. And one is their technical training. The second one is their mental training, and the third one is their spiritual training. And by spiritual training, I don't mean religion. I mean, what is the spiritual practice that they have that allows them to understand that the world is bigger than they are, and therefore allows them to operate at a much higher level of performance. And so we take that very seriously, that people performance thing and that psyche thing, like very seriously.
This is brilliant. Look, I love this.
Sorry, I probably dropped quite a lot on you there. To
no, it's absolutely brilliant. I love this. We're very much aligned. I said, you must prioritize your health and well-being, and that's my number one priority. And often I get challenged now, well, is it not your family, is it not your wife? I say, well, I can't look after my wife if I'm not fit and well myself, so it's an enabler to everything else. So first is my health and well-being, second is my family's health and well-being, and that then keeps me well to develop and be of service to our company and our clients within our program. So we're absolutely aligned. I'm really curious to explore what practically you do to cultivate good mental practices and good spiritual practices within your team
in the company. Yeah, well, the training, it probably goes back to the, we call it training because that's what people understand. Companies have training budgets. So it comes in 3 tiers. So tier 1 is technical learning. So I don't know how to use Excel. Okay, well then use LinkedIn Learning, which is where we throw all our trainings to do that. Then the next level is now you're going to interact with other people in our company. How we want you to do that with empathy, passion, clarity. So how do we do that? And we use a third-party company in the UK called Positive, and they do very intensive training on our teams all the time around that. And it's just like, it really is the how not to be an asshole training, and that works out brilliantly, and they are brilliant as a company. And then the third thing is spiritual, and we've co-developed a spiritual program called Light with a UK company. And because the problem with spiritual, well, first of all, why do you need spiritual training? And you need it because you need to understand that the world is bigger than just you and your own little world, basically. That it's about that if you can make everyone else more important than you, not so much from minding your physical self, but from the point of view of who do you look after in business, then you become very powerful. It's a contradiction almost, but if you make everyone else more important, then you become bigger than just you. And but the problem with spiritual development is, if you're religious, then prayer is a very powerful spiritual development tool. But if you're not religious, then how do you develop a structure for spirituality? And of course, there are miles of tools: yoga, Pilates, meditation, you name it. But everybody has a different spiritual preference. And so what we've done with Light is we allow people to explore like 70 different spiritual practices, and then let them pick the one that they want, basically, or the one that attaches better to them, and then grow from there. And it's some highly evolved shit, right? And at the level we're operating at, we want our people to become highly evolved and enhanced because it fixes everything. It fixes their family life. It makes the workplace much more enjoyable for everybody. And it helps make them a boatload of money. And in the process of doing that, make us a boatload of money.
Yeah, there's just so much in that, Norman. I love that. And the second principle of our ScaleX framework is purpose and vision. They're hand in glove in many respects. Your vision is just the manifestation, the mental picture of your purpose. And I often get challenged in terms of but look, it's just it's cool at the moment for everybody to have a purpose and find a why. But I mean, purpose at a small p level is what you're speaking about from a team perspective, is about making the person beside you look like an all-star. It's being the star maker and not the star. And there's this paradox, as you describe it, of well, if I make that person look better, surely that's, I'm hiding my talents under a bushel. But this theme is,
it doesn't work like that, though. Yeah. people know where the light came from that's under the bushel, right? And people sense that within 30 seconds, so they don't need to know that it was you did it, and it's brilliant, because if you can get a culture of that, like our company, we have, I don't know, a couple of hundred people, and if you meet any of them, they're always just taking the piss out of themselves, because they understand that it's not about them, right? It's about what they're doing and what they're enabling. And people then love the culture, and because they love the culture, they either want to work with us, or if it's customers, they want to be a customer, because they want to be around that light, basically.
And again, this is something we've introduced into our program. I'm a Wim Hof method instructor. I found it very, very profound. I trained to be an instructor in the last couple of years because of the profound impact it had on my own life. I got into meditation probably 6 or 7 years ago, and I'm seeing the companies who participate in our own program now introducing breathing practices into their own business. Is this something you guys do collectively, or do you leave your team to do their own thing?
No, it's collective. So we have an app that we've co-developed. And there are other apps out there. Like, I'm a big fan of Sam Harris's, all of his stuff, and certainly his meditation apps. And so I find that quite powerful. But the problem with meditation or Wim Hof, which is brilliant, is some people just don't like that. Like what we find is 50% of the organization are well up for any spiritual madcap stuff that you can throw in front of them. And the other 50% are nervous of all that weird heebie-jeebie shit. And so for those people, you need to find ways of putting it in front of them, that you need them to take the medicine where it doesn't feel like medicine, And that's what we're building out in this Light app at the moment, is exploration of all the other spiritual practices, and it is, but like, that's some highly evolved stuff, right? Because and that's where the positive training first is important, because you've got to get to that point, right? And if, it's a very famous, I think it was Gandhi, or it was some meditation teacher, and somebody said, like, well, I don't have time for all that meditation stuff. And then he said, well, I told you to meditate for 20 minutes. Now you need to meditate for 40 minutes. If you don't have time, then you need to do more. And when I read that first, I thought it was a lot of rubbish. And now I guess I deeply understand the comment, which is, you have to find a space for a practice, right, of some description. And then that opens up everything else, right? It opens up time to do everything else. And you're like, I would put a lot of our success down to meditation, and then around the coaches that we've worked with on the various practices, right? And it opens up capacity and scale that you can't even fathom before you start,
Yeah, wonderful. And I'll just reference Patrick McKeown, another Irish man, a wonderful individual. This company is called Oxygen Advantage, and he's written quite a number of books. One of them is Atomic Focus, actually, which introduces the reader to lots of different breath practices. But we can go back to a simple box breathing practice, which has been developed by the US military. You guys will be very familiar with it in your own company, and it's something that we do within our own business. Start our morning meetings with 2 minutes of box breathing collectively, and it's very, very powerful. No, I'm the man who grew up on a farm, developed a welding business, and is now advocating that we should all save the planet, and is meditating. I'm going to bring you back, which clearly is very, very purposeful. Bring you back to Inspired Gaming Group for a moment. This business was valued at one stage at £1 billion, or billion
dollars.
$1 billion.
Yeah.
And just tell us that story, and then I want to connect how you've got to CoolPlanet.
Yeah, so we built it from 8 people to 2,500 people over from 2001 until 2006. We floated on the LSE. And then there was a takeover bid in 2007 for $1 billion from a hedge fund. And then the famous story is these transactions take a while, about in that case, about 7 or 8 months. And we were hours away from selling the business for $1 billion when just the whole deal collapsed, principally because of Lehman Brothers and the GFC, the global financial crisis. But the reason it's an interesting story, I guess, is most people don't get that close, and I guess the other interesting thing about it is I say it was the best thing that ever happened. Yeah.
Why is that?
Because life is a mixture of success and then things that teach you humility, and you need both, right? Otherwise you become an asshole. And I definitely needed that on many levels. I needed that humility check, and also a lot of the success of, like, CoolPlanet's a multi-billion business now, and the success of CoolPlanet is down to the grind and the changes we had to make and the things we had to learn about ourselves. Like a lot of what we've talked about in this podcast so far was learned out of that. Like at the time I was 18 stone. I was eating like rubbish. I was traveling the world. My lifestyle was crap. And so you learn all of the things you need to learn to function. And now, it sounds like pushy, but like if you want to be successful, you're supposed to operate like you're successful before you're successful. So if you're not sleeping that well, you're not eating properly, you're not exercising, and you're not finding some way to relax, then you're going to be a bit of a mess, and that's going to bite you at some point. It's either going to get you in health, or it's going to get you in the business, right? Because this business game that we all play it's like a sport, right? And if you get to the higher levels, or if you want to get to the higher levels, then it's an elite sport. And at that level, you got to act like you're playing in the Premier League, right? And what does that look like? Well, it doesn't look like living your life really badly and being tired all the time and all that. You just can't do that, right? And so a lot of that was learned from that horrible time. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend failing to sell a business for $1 billion, but it's certainly one way to do it. Yeah.
Again, so much of that. How important do you feel the inner work, the leader doing the inner work, is in the context of scaling?
It's everything. It's everything. And in our business now, there's 7 in the executive team, and they have the services of a shrink, like a business coach, shrink, call it what you want. We call it shrink, all the time, because it's like their mental health and their performance is the only thing I care about, because if they operate properly and at pace and scale, then I don't have to do anything. Yeah. So my only thought process is, what are they up to and how are they doing? Yeah.
So profound. So how did you move then? Obviously, there was a humbling moment that you could almost touch the $1 billion check and it disappeared in front of your eyes. And I remember that very difficult time. And we came out of that and termed it actually the best recession that ever happened, because it forced a lot of change that ordinarily, I suspect, wouldn't have happened had that recession not forced it. So a lot of change around processes and things. But how did you move then from a guy who, without saying it, I sense not so purposeful, but it was just chasing the big exit, to developing and finding a company that actually is incredibly purposeful and is making a huge change, positive change in the world that we live in. Bridge that for us.
Well, I guess maybe first of all, separate purpose from doing good, right? Because you can build an incredibly successful business and be very purposeful. You know, it's like, what is your purpose? To raise great cattle in Dungannon and make money to feed my family. Nothing wrong with that purpose, right? It's not sexy climate change stuff, but there's nothing wrong with that purpose, right? What is your purpose? To run an engineering business and to make slurry spreaders for farmers. That's okay, right? You're an employer in the community and all that. I guess as you become more successful, you want to work on a purpose that has scale, and that's where we got to climate change. We wanted to do something that would impact 1 billion people, and the reason we want to do that is if you've made a couple of bucks, then it can be quite hard to get up in the morning. And so the way you get up in the morning is to have bigger goals, basically. Yeah. So that's why the bigger scale stuff that we do. And for me as well, I was never, we were in the gambling business. I was never ashamed of being in the gambling business. We spent a lot of time trying to stop people from using our machines more than getting them to use our machines. And but I guess at the age of 38, which I was when we started this business, I wanted to look back in the last chunk of my life and know that we'd done something good for humanity, basically. And that's why the focus on climate change and the other stuff we focus on. I think what I misunderstood when we started this business was also the effect we could have on the people that worked in the business and also our clients. And I think I'm only realizing that in the last year or two, is that it's about the people that work in our company and the kind of unlocking their greatness, and then what can they do, and so one of our goals, like the hierarchy in our business, is one, solve climate change or help solve climate change, two, look after our people, and then three, make money, right? In that order. Because if we look after our people, we'll make money, right? And we'll make an awful lot of money. So that's after the equal sign in the equation. It's not before the equal sign. And then there is no point in looking after our people in a world where climate change exists, right? So that has to be the priority. So everything we do is very logical. A lot of people think we're holier than thou, and then they meet us and realize we curse quite a lot, and that we're very pushy. But it's much not, from a purely selfish point of view, it's much nicer to get up in the morning and work on something that has a proper global vision than it is just to work in something that doesn't have that. Yeah. So if you're going to get up in the morning, better to have something nice that you're doing rather than not.
Again, lots in that. I love the hierarchy there, which is very consistent. Again, I referenced Margot Hoek earlier with what she advocates: planet, people, profit. Profit becomes a byproduct if you're doing something that has sustainability at its very core. And ultimately, I remember a conversation with Paul Akers in one of the earlier seasons, and he's a lean expert. 2-second lean is his mantra about reducing waste, and he talks about the biggest wasteful resource that we have as leaders at our disposal is the waste of unlocked potential within our people. Mm-hmm. And again, something that you've alluded to there, Norman. Just to come back to some of the technicalities then, or the components, the principles as you would see them, of your success of scaling multiple businesses to a size that very, very few will ever see. What would you say are the component aspects of the the success that you've had?
Look, if you boil it down to one thing, and it's the thing that every entrepreneur struggles with, it's hiring and developing good people. Yeah. And a lot of people put that down to interview technique and da da da. Right. Our thing around hiring people is, which nobody wants to hear, I find, is we don't have great interview techniques. We're trying to figure out only one thing when we're hiring somebody, and that's whether or not they're going to work with everybody else that we have, right? Then once somebody starts, the first thing we're looking out for is what we internally kind of go the 40%er. So we go, we were wrong. This person is not a high performer. They're just not, they're sub 50% performance. And what we try and do there is move them on within 3 months of starting in the business. And that's the first shocking thing. Like when we hire managers and then they hire people, and then we're going to them saying, hey, we're thinking about moving that person on that you just hired a month ago. They're immediately shocked. They're like, well, like I'd like to have them for at least a year. And we're kind of going, what do you think is going to change in that period of time? And the reason we as companies don't fire people quick enough is because we're not psychopaths, right? And therefore we don't like inflicting pain. And so we don't want to disappoint people. But actually, the best thing you can do for that person is to allow them to move on to the right organization. So the other thing then you have to be careful of is the 60%ers, right? So they're not ultimate high performance either, but they're pretty good, right? And the real discipline is moving on the 60%ers. Yeah. And then if you can do that, then you're into some serious organizational overperformance. But it's the toughest thing. It's the thing that almost every company doesn't do. And nothing demotivates a high performer more than them watching you tolerate a low performer. Right? So how you kill your highest performer is you let them watch you not fire somebody. Yeah. Because what it says to them is, I don't have to be that good here.
I always say the greatest gift you can give a high performing team is the hire of a great person, another great person. And again, it's incumbent on the leaders to do that. I'm curious, a couple of things. How do you objectively assess performance within that 1 to 3 month window?
Yeah, so we have values in the company. We have 6 values, and there's nothing revolutionary about our values. There are things like we are brave, we think differently. If you saw them on a wall, you wouldn't think they were out of place anywhere. But what we do is we are all the time benchmarking people against our values, and then we score them. And if they get below a certain score, then that's the end of it. Right? And now, if somebody it's very different if somebody is in the organization for a couple of years and then their performance drops. Then an entirely different sequence of events happens, which is clearly they were good. Clearly they were getting along very well, and now something has happened. And that triggers a different thing in our organization, which is what has happened and how do we fix what has happened. And that calls in our coaches, all of our HR team, all the training and all that, because we have a very different thing, which is we want to fix what's wrong. Yeah. And that's for the business's sake, because it's just so difficult to get high performers, but also it's a deeply personal thing. Something's wrong. We want to know what it is. We want to fix it. Yeah. And we're unapologetic about fixing something. Like if it's a health thing, if their kid is sick, we will throw the absolute bag at the problem. Because, you might say, well, what a great company, but actually it's selfish too, right? It's like these people are so bloody hard to get. We will do anything rather than lose them. Yeah.
There's quite a lot in there, actually. the values, number one, in terms of the assessment of the alignment to the values, how do you do that practically in those early months? You know, how's that scored? How's that assessed?
Well, there's a system, and you go into it, and like it's a HR system that we have, and the manager manages the person, and like it's what most people don't do, right? They don't sit with the person and go, it's a month now. Let me just give you some feedback. And the reason we don't give feedback is because it's criticism. And we don't like criticizing other people. And the reason we don't like criticizing other people is because we're insecure in ourselves. And so we think that criticism shows like that it's poor form, right? But if you're very comfortable in your own skin, then you can criticize other people, because you're not saying, hey, Mary, you're a bit rubbish at that, right? You're saying, Mary, what the company needs here is this and this. What you're doing is that and that. That is not what's required now. That doesn't make me a bad person or a good person. It doesn't make me feel uncomfortable. It's just a statement of object fact, right? And if you can, it's not even that you leave the emotion out of it. Of course, you're worried about them and you don't want them to be unsuccessful, but at the same time, it is just a statement of fact. Right? So it is, you were saying earlier, what is the single biggest thing about scaling? That's it. And if you're listening to this and you have 3 in your senior management and one of them isn't great and you don't want to have the conversation, then you know where the problem is, right? Get on with it, right? And so what we do now is we list in our company energetic blockers, basically. So if we have 6 or 7 divisions in the business as well, right? And so if a division is not performing, particularly a new division that we've set up, we list now the energetic blockers. So we go, is that a person is blocking this? Is it the wider organization are rejecting the organ of the new division? What is it, right? And we list them down, and then we knock them off one after the other. And it's fascinating what happens when you do that, like you just get explosive growth. So, but a lot of people don't do it. And I don't want it to sound hippy dippy. It's not, right? It is like, yourself. Everyone knows the person that when they walk into the room, they suck all the energy out, right? And if you're there trying to create a new division, who's sucking the energy out, right? And maybe it's a fixable problem because you can understand why they're doing that. Or maybe it's not fixable, And then sometimes though, and we had this recently with one of our newest divisions, the organization was rejecting the new division. And we have a great organization. So why was it doing that? It turned out it was doing it because they were worried that division was going to suck too much cash flow out of the business. They were worried, selfishly, they were worried that since they were the most successful division, that this new division would overshadow them ultimately. So when you understand the underlying why, then you can start fixing it. And sometimes you can fix it with a sledgehammer. Other times you fix it with something a little bit more subtle. Yeah.
I'm suspecting that candor is one of your values.
Yeah, well, candor is buried within We Are Brave, because people think we are brave that we make some big risky decisions. A lot of the time, most of the time, we don't make risky decisions. They might appear risky from the outside, but they're considered. But We Are Brave has to do with communication. It is like, do you have the courage to communicate to that person how you really feel? Because that is what this is ultimately all about. And you can't communicate to them how you really feel if you're not comfortable in your own skin. So get comfortable in your own skin. So now, if you're listening to this podcast and you're going, that guy's turned into a hippie, I can tell you to the dollar how much cash is in every bank account in our company right now. I can click on it there right in front of my screen. So we are not, we've got plans upon plans, all of that kind of stuff. So, but it all comes back to people clearly communicating with each other.
And just before we move into the close, I'm curious, do you do anything innovative or creative within the hiring process itself?
No, we used to, but it was all a lot of rubbish, because people are able to hide their psychopathy long enough to do an interview. Yeah. And we have the internal joke in our place is we don't know they're not a psychopath until after 12 weeks. Yeah. Now, psychopath is a completely over the top emotive description, but it gets the message across.
I get it. And back to your original point about, I talk about radiators and drains, and ultimately we want to move and cultivate a culture where we've lots of radiators and remove the drains.
But also if somebody becomes a drain and they were a radiator, then what happened, right? And if they've been a drain for a very long time, then very hard to fix it, right? If it's something that's new, then it's something we can fix. Yeah, and sometimes it can be fixed very quickly.
The last hour has just been hugely inspiring. It's absolutely flown. Moving into the close, Norman, I always pose a question to the guests to offer 3 timeless takeaways for our listeners. You have a man who has lived an incredible life to date, and I'm looking at a very young man across the screen at me, so there's plenty of miles left yet. So what can you leave our listeners with today? 3 timeless takeaways, please.
Okay, we'll do it very fast in the limited time we have. So I'll tell you a story. I used to teach people how to walk on hot coals. Right? When I was about 21, I learned how to do it, and then I became slightly obsessed with it and taught people how to do it. And there are 3 things you need to walk on hot coals. Anybody can walk on hot coals, but you need these 3 things. The first thing is fill your mind with happy thoughts. So what does that mean for the average day? Who are you hanging around with? Are they a radiator or a drain? Right? What are you listening to? Are you listening to podcasts like this, or are you listening to bullshit negative media bringing you down all the time? So that's the first one. Fill your mind with happy thoughts. Next one is, if you're going to walk on hot coals, you need to know where the beginning is and where the end is. And everyone talks about goals all the time. Most people, number one, never write down their goals, right? But if you write down your goals, that's completely useless without communicating those goals to people. The reason people don't communicate their goals is because when people communicate their goals, other people mock them, right? Gandhi said, first they mock at you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win, right? So people don't want to get mocked, so they don't communicate your goals. If you don't communicate your goals, you're not going to gather the team that's going to help you achieve your goals. So you have to have the courage to communicate it. And the final one when you're walking on hot coals is keep fucking walking, right? Because if you stop, you're going to burn your feet off, right? Likewise, this shit is about hard work, right? Like it is like one of the key things we're looking at with people when we hire them is, are they willing to work their ass off? Not for us, but for them, right? And you can't cheat hard work, right? Everyone talks about, like Tim Ferriss talks about, like, what's the shortcut for that? What's the shortcut for this? Enough with the shortcuts. Just grind that fucker out and everything will be fine.
There's no hack for hard work. I love those. And I reference people to a book by Sean Aker called The Happiness Advantage. There's so much research behind this and so much practical action we can take to cultivate a happiness mindset. And again, we're looking for the 1% all the time to seed that scaling mindset. I love those, writing down the goals. I was reading something recently saying actually just writing down a goal is only 10% of what it is to get you there, and actually communicating it, and it breaks it down into different percentages, but communicating it and having an accountability partner for what you've communicated actually takes you from that 10% up to 90%. So I love that. And yeah, I
have an accountability partner. Her, I've been married to her for 25 years.
I am one of those too, Norman. Look, and the third, momentum creates momentum. It's been an absolute joy to speak with you today. I hope I get the chance to do this again, because this went somewhere I wasn't expecting. So there's so much in that. What's next for you? And if people want to reach you, where can they?
We're just going to keep growing this thing and helping our people and helping solve climate. You can get me at Norman Crowley and the number 1 on Twitter. And then the group website is CoolPlanet.io. Or if you want to see the sexiest thing we do, go to studioava.com, which we didn't get to talk about today, which is our electric hypercar business. Everyone should have an electric hypercar business.
Well, look, I've been following you guys on social media, and you're doing some really cool stuff with Land Rover at the moment, electrifying their vehicles. The imagery is fantastic. Whoever your videographer is,
Ben, he's brilliant. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I encourage everybody to go there. Norman, it's been a delight to speak with you today. I wish you all the very best in everything that you're doing. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and time with me today.
Thank you.